good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where you're joining from, to this long overdue and widely anticipated webinar on hacking APIs for fun and profit. So about the speakers, so my name is Colin Domoney. I am the API Security Research Specialist and Developer Advocate at 42Crunch. And more importantly, I'm the editor of the APIsecurity.io weekly newsletter. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by, from Fortbridge, a London-based penetration testing company, Adrian Tiron and Bogdan Tiron. So about this webinar, so where did the idea come up? So folks are as old as me, they'll know that smashing the stack for fun and profit, that was one of the first hacking guides that was published, I don't know when that was published, a long time ago, right? And this webinar is about how do we hack APIs, right? So we're going to learn how to think like an attacker. Most importantly, and the guys are going to show this, is how a couple of simple vulnerabilities can be chained together to create a really serious exploit. And then also know what to look for when choosing a pen test partner. So the agenda, it's sort of going to be in three parts. So we're going to get to know Adrian and Bogdan and what they're doing. We're going to have an open chat on what we're seeing in the API security industry. And then we'll go deeper into the UNMI electronic scale vulnerability. And this was a vulnerability that was covered in the API Security.io newsletter. It's a very popular write-up. And Bogdan is going to take us right through the details of that. And then we'll wrap with a little bit of the tools and methodologies, where to learn more on the topic. And Adrian, welcome. It's really good to have you on this webinar. Could you just give us, an introduction? What do we need to know about you? How did you get into this game?
Sure. Thank you very much, Colin. I'm Adrian Tiron. I've been in this industry for more than 15 years, close to 20 by now, to be fair. I started initially as a developer, and then security was part of my hobby and my job. So slowly, I managed to move into a full-time job as a security guy. Initially, I was a pretty, let's say, generalist guy in security. Then I decided to specialize in application security. And then in the past couple of years, 4 or 5 years, I also specialized in cloud security as well. So this is how I became certified in AWS security, Azure security. And of course, as an old timer, I also got the offensive security certified professional. I know you like that a lot. Yeah. And a couple of other certifications like DevSecOps and other stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm in about my third round of renewing my OSCP without actually having ever done it. How did you find that? How did you find that experience?
It was a challenging one, to be fair, very challenging. Yeah. I would say challenging, and probably that's why it's one of the most respected certifications in the industry. That's my opinion, and I think a lot of people think the same way about it. They have like a very good reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only something like 2,000 qualified people worldwide. It's a very small, very very elite group that you joined in. What are you doing with IoT?
Just studying. Yeah. Because we're already doing application security, cloud security. So we thought, well, what's the next thing that we could cover? And It was IoT, and it's also strictly related to the UNMI hack that we're going to talk about
today. Yeah. I'm pretty sure IoT is going to be a big thing. Is the problem that IoT has is it's really done on a budget, and those stacks that they're building those devices on are not well maintained. I think it's going to be a bit of a disaster zone.
Yep.
Bogdan, why don't you give us an intro to yourself and how you came to be in this game?
Hi, everyone. So how did I enter into the game? That's a good question. I finished uni and I was looking to enter into a different industry, to start a master and go into management industry kind of. And because I failed in that one really bad, and I was still trying after failing to go into management industry, Adrian suggested me to stay in the computer science industry and start learning security. And slowly I started into bug bounty hunting. And after let's say, finding some vulnerabilities, failing there as well into getting some rewards after probably half a year. And so of looking of security roles, at least in Romania, 10 years ago, there were only roles for seniors. So I was lucky to find a role actually in UK. And slowly I started as a security guy for Bet365, a gambling company. And slowly I grew up from there as a junior after graduation. So sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, no. Well, the world of management's losses, the world of security's gains. So we're glad to have you on our side.
Blame Adrian, by the way.
Yeah. So let's talk about the research that you've done, because your blog is now quite prolific. You've had a couple of. We're going to talk about Yunmai. Just quickly take us through, Adrian. Maybe take us through some of those other bits of research that you've done.
Sure. So we started one of our first blog posts was related to a chain of vulnerabilities in Joomla. Basically, we changed 2 vulnerabilities to achieve a super admin takeover. We also disclosed a couple of vulnerabilities in cPanel vulnerabilities, which allowed us to achieve privilege escalation and remote code execution as root. So I think this was also one of our most popular blog posts because it's about vulnerabilities in a big vendor.
Yep.
The Yunmai hack, obviously, we're going to talk about it today. Then we also found a password reset vulnerability in Drupal, which again allowed us to take over the admin account. We have some more stuff that it's pending. We're probably going to release it in a month or so.
Yep.
Also related to API hacking. I'm going to give a few hints today, but I can't give full details.
Okay.
Yep. And also we found a couple of vulnerabilities in Concrete CMS as well. Again, a very popular research for us, one of the most visited articles. Basically, the most important finding there was a remote code execution, which we found in the upload file feature, which basically we had to exploit a double race condition vulnerability. So it was a quite complex issue to exploit. I think we've invested probably about 2 weeks or so from finding the vulnerability to actually writing the POC.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You've recently been back in the news now with the research that you did on finding a Cserf issue in, ironically, this a Node Cserf middleware. Just tell us about that, just briefly.
Sure. So this was actually one of the things that we disclosed about a month ago. Ironically, we invested probably the least amount of time in finding and exploiting this vulnerability, about 2 days, and it ended up being extremely popular. Basically, Cserf is a popular middleware in NPM, which is downloaded by about 440,000 times per week. And as a result of this disclosure, basically, the author of the package decided that he's going to deprecate it. Initially, he wanted to patch it, and then he just gave up and he said, I'm going to deprecate this. And you see he added there a message like, please use another CSRF package.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the outcome of the finding.
Yeah.
And it had a slow start, but then it snowballed over a couple of days, maybe a few weeks, and it exceeded our expectations, as I said, because soon it received a lot of media coverage from big companies like Veracode. I think they were one of the first big companies that they wrote about it. And then it was Nick's turn to write about it. And also Portswigger, they wrote in the Daily Swig section. To be fair, I think a lot of our articles got coverage from Daily Swig, so we're one of the regulars there, let's say.
Yeah, that's also one of my go-to. They do a fantastic job. Right, brilliant. So let's start talking about API security. So we're going to talk at a general level of your experience, and I think we'll start with, what trends are we seeing? I mean, I write the APIsecurity.io weekly newsletter. API security, we have a breach most weeks or some issue. So just your first point there, the uptick in vulnerabilities. How are you seeing that? Where's that coming from?
Well, as a result of our pen test, basically whenever we see an API, sometimes we just go to the API and we start hacking. And more often than not, we actually end up finding some high and critical vulnerabilities. So, for example, we have now report in progress. Like I said, it's going to be disclosed in about 1 month. It's a huge web application, and it also has an API.
Yeah.
So initially, we started by testing the web app. And unfortunately for us, we didn't find anything significant in the web app. And then we realized, oh, wait, there's the API. So let's go there and let's start hacking.
Yep.
And yeah, we found a critical vulnerability. So APIs definitely are a good target. And sometimes you should just start with hacking the APIs because they're newer, they've been added recently, and they're less tested, let's say. So it's like a good attack surface for an
exactly.
Yeah.
And you've got that point there. It's the best attack surface. I mean, certainly that's what I would do as well. Because especially with the days of single page applications, mobile applications, the thing they all have in common is an API. The lack of skilled engineers and talent retention, I don't think anybody in this industry would challenge that. Do you think there's a specific problem around APIs? Is it worse for APIs than other technologies?
It's difficult to put it's difficult to say. Like, I think it's a generally applicable issue in security, especially in offensive security, to be honest. Yeah, it's something that we've seen a lot in our careers over the past almost 2 decades. There's definitely lack of skills, I would say, in offensive security in general, starting with any type of application, whether it's a web, mobile, and API as well, definitely.
Okay. And then your comments about DevSecOps, that certainly echo that. That offensive security, that's something that is something that's easy to automate, right? And your comment about DevSecOps, I've been in DevSecOps long enough to know that really what it means is just finding automatic ways to call your scanning tools, which can produce more bug reports. I mean, that's a slightly, harsh judgment, but your point on that, your thoughts on that? Yeah.
So what we've seen is that everybody adopted this trend, and from a defensive perspective, they think that it's the holy grail of security. They think there's some sort of silver bullet, while in reality, the reality is that you're just inserting and automating some tools. Tools that, as offensive security specialists, we already know that have their own, let's say, limitations for years.
Yeah,
that's why you need the specialists to fill those gaps. And often, what we've seen is that these DevSecOps, let's call them DevSecOps tools, they're installed by non-security specialists. So it's a complicated discussion. I mean, we could probably make another webinar about this, about benchmarking security tools, choosing the right tools, make sure they're configured properly. So yeah, most of the times companies don't insert the proper tools, they don't configure them correctly, or again, they don't have the right type of specialists to manage them, to configure them, and to make sure that they get the most out of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. So, and also just a reminder for the audience, do pop questions through. We're happy to take questions while we go. I work for an API security company. I very definitely consider API security to be different to web security. And what I mean by web security is, the stuff we used to do, well, we've been doing before, right? So web applications, the client apps, they're similar, but the focus is different. Fully agree. Adrian, your take on that, and particularly, let's talk about, you've got the OWASP top 10 and this contested point that why does API security need its own top 10? What are your thoughts on that?
From my point of view, it's about basically the probability of finding certain classes of vulnerability over others. So when we pentest web apps, we search for certain classes of vulnerabilities. When we pentest an API, we're still looking for, let's say, injection vulnerabilities, but we know that the chances of finding them are lower, right? So we're trying to think a bit out of the box. We're reordering the attacks in our mind a bit differently. Let's say we prioritize them differently. So, for example, just to give an example, let's say you have a higher chance of finding a mass assignment in an API, I would say, or if you look at JSON parsing issues, you have a higher chance of finding that in APIs because APIs rely a lot on JSON, right? So obviously you need to prioritize your attacks a bit in that area. As always, like we always like to say around here, skills pay the bills. So you have to have a lot of training. You have to know what you're doing and put in the work. And as I said there, one of the biggest gaps, in our opinion, in modern security practices is that although companies, they adopted tools, security tools, one of the issues is that they haven't adopted actually the offensive security skill set and mindset. That is lacking. That is a big gap.
Yeah.
And we think that would make a real difference.
Yeah.
In securing APIs or in general applications.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in my background, I come from a development background. I used to build military equipment back in the day in South Africa, and you absolutely think like an attacker, because you're thinking how's my product, my piece of equipment going to be attacked. And I've always had that, which I guess is why I've sort of stumbled into onto the dark side and I'm working in security. But yeah, too often I see developers who just don't think, they don't think with a pessimistic mindset, right? They don't think what could go wrong, how could things go wrong. Exactly. And the worrying thing with that is if I look at these API security vulnerabilities that we have, a lot of them are pretty basic things. They don't need deep specialist skills to exploit things. They're often very basic mistakes, like file upload functions or command injection on a terminal. They're very basic things where they just didn't think what would happen if somebody did that. So yeah, how do you? The one thing that I agree with your point about offensive security being difficult to put into the SDLC, and if we've got a shortage of skilled people, how do we scale? What would you do to try and scale offensive security in the industry?
That's a very, very difficult question to answer, to be honest, Colin. I think if anybody would be able to do that, they would probably be a billionaire, to be fair, or something. Scaling is very difficult. So there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, I would say you need to make sure that you have the right tools inserted in the pipeline. Now, I'm only talking about the automation part right here, right? Because as I said earlier, I've seen a lot of companies, they're saying, oh, we have a pipeline, we have a security pipeline, we have the tools, all that. What I've seen is sometimes the tools are not even benchmark. There's a high number of false positives. There's a very small number of true positives as well. So the detection rate is just not there, right? So first of all, you'd have to know your tools very well, because the attackers, they definitely know their tool very well, and they have the manual experience in pentesting as well. So you'd have to be able to match that from a defensive perspective. Yep. Now, this is just covering the automation part, as I said. The other part is, of course, is the human factor, which here is the biggest challenge. So I don't have the best answer. Like I don't think anybody has like a solution for this problem yet. Yeah. Anyway. Because basically you need senior people, you need seniors. They need to be highly skilled and, of course, very motivated to get the job done. And this is very challenging, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree with that point in general, but I think what gives me a lot of kind of hope is that, the very reason we're talking to you on this webinar now is because I've had people, developers, reading and writing code, working on, reading my newsletter and coming and saying, hey, we want to hear from pen test guys. We want to understand what they do. So I think that's we can co-opt our developer friends to learn some of these tools and take out some of that basic low-hanging fruit. Nice. So let's just talk very briefly about authorization, authentication. So I first certainly agree there's no silver bullet. There's no easy answer to that. Just talk us through some of your observations.
Sure. So to be honest, I've been spending, let's say, a lot of time on LinkedIn recently, and I've noticed various thought leaders who have some advices along the lines of, oh, just implement authentication or just use authorization and that's going to fix all your problems. Or recently, after the Fortbridge, I'm sure we all heard about it. Yeah. I've seen security leaders mentioning, oh, this is a really easy problem to fix. All you have to do is training on social engineering and adopt security as part of the culture. Now, this is a lot easier said than done, right? We all agree with that. Like we know how difficult it is. So The reality is, if we're talking about authentication and authorization, it's very, very context specific. OAuth, OpenID, SAML, like these are very challenging protocols, even for pen testers, to be fair. Like we spent a lot of time understanding these protocols, studying what vulnerabilities have been found in them by other experts, right?
Yep.
So it's not an easy task. And when you have a project, let's say you're working in a big company, you have the business requirements. They say, oh, we want, I don't know, 3 or 5 types of authentication. We've seen this in our pen testing projects, which basically means increased complexity. And as we say in security, as pen testers, complexity is basically the enemy of security. And we don't like cliches in general, but we believe in this one. Complexity and security, like, they don't go along very well.
Yep.
So the first advice that we would have here is to have somebody with the skill set and experience to analyze these protocols, to write the requirements, and then also to try to hack the application, the authentication and the authorization.
Yep.
Because we've seen what's happening in Bug Bounty, in the security, in the API newsletter. We've seen what's happening, right? Like every week there's some sort of disclosure, an API an authentication bypass or an authorization bypass or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you need to have somebody with the right skill set. Like this would be, I would say, the most important advice that we can give here.
Okay.
And from the other perspective, because we also worked as security consultants previously, we did this role. So what we notice is that working embedded in a team, doing the security bits, sometimes can be challenging due to various reasons. For example, you can have a lockdown system. Even if it's a cool Mac computer, it's still locked down. You can't do a lot of things on it.
Yep.
Sometimes you don't have access to the environment, the AWS environment, or Azure or whatever, or there are some slow processes in the company. You're blocked. You don't have access to the sandbox. You need another team to unblock it. Might take a day or two or something like that. And of course, politics, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're aware of that factor as well.
Yeah. I come from a investment banking background. It's hard work. And threat modeling.
Threat modeling, as it says there, as you already know, we're not a fan of that.
Yeah.
We think basically that hacking is better than threat modeling.
Yeah.
In our experience, like I've worked in a few companies, they insisted on doing threat modeling. We did the threat modeling, and after that, let's say a couple of years later, they hired us to do the pen test. We did the pen test and we found some critical vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we think that a good pen test done by skilled security people, it's better than threat modeling.
Yeah.
Because it's hands-on, right? It's hands-on. The purpose is you need to find those vulnerabilities. That's what it's all about, in our opinion. Finding the vulnerabilities and make sure they're fixed.
Yeah, I think threat modeling is a good way to get people to start thinking about the problem space. But as you say, you really need to get down to the implementation and actually trying to do things.
Absolutely. To be honest with you. So let's say if you're a company, you're, let's say, at the beginning of your security journey, you don't have a lot of experience in security, threat modeling will help as a first step. But as you grow and as you become more mature, you need to become more hands-on.
Yep.
Right. And you need to actually try and focus on finding more and more vulnerabilities, because the vulnerabilities will be there for sure. You just have to find them.
Okay. So, Adrian, just before we move on to the highlights of the show, how to choose a pen test partner? What would you recommend people look for?
Sure. So this is a very good, and we receive this question a lot, honestly, like from discussions with customers and with friends. So they were asking like how because we tell them, if they ask us, do you do that type of service? Sometimes we might say, no, we don't. And they ask us, well, how do we find, or what do you recommend? Who should we choose, or how should we choose a pen testing partner? So we have a couple of tips. So the first tip would be, if the company has a good technical blog, where the purpose is they have to write about their research, about the vulnerabilities they discover, because this is how they prove to the customers, like, look, we actually know what we're doing. We actually have the right people, they're skilled, and they can find vulnerabilities. This is the first point. The second point, somewhat related to the first, it's that the content on the blog needs to be aligned to the type of project that you need to be executed and tested, right? So, for example, if you need a mobile pen test, ideally you'd search for what kind of mobile research they did and they published on their blog. If you need something related to application security or red teaming, you'd search their blog. Okay, did they do some quality work regarding red teaming or regarding application security? And you would search for that type of content on their blog, right? That's the second point. So this would be, let's say, a first step in choosing a pen testing company. Now, if you want to take this a step further, the next thing you would be interested, okay, the company looks okay, let's say, but who will actually execute this pen test that I need? So ideally, you'd like to know a few things about the pen testers, because if it's a big consultancy company, they might have, like, I don't know, tens or maybe hundreds of consultants, right? But only a few of them will be very senior, very skilled. Some of them might be junior, some of them might be mid-level. So the question is, what will you get? Which resource will be allocated to your project? How skilled are they, right? You probably want to know those things. You probably want a skilled senior guy. You probably don't want a junior to be allocated to 80% of your project, right? That's what we recommend. So you have to understand those things, and you have to know, and you have to ask the right questions. Also, let's go to the fourth point, and it's something that we noticed a lot. This is before we started the company, but also quite recently as well. If, let's say, you receive a pen test report, is the report filled with low severity vulnerabilities? Like, we consider that this is more often than not a red flag. The question is, if the report is filled with low severity issues, why is that? Is it because the project is actually really, really secure? Or is it maybe because the pen testers were, let's say, not skilled enough? Maybe they were juniors, or maybe they were simply not motivated. So this is strictly related, for example, to our latest disclosure that we mentioned at the beginning, the Cserf vulnerability. So this is how this actually happened. We received a pen test report from one of our customers. Big company, we're not going to mention the name, that doesn't matter. And it had like 5 low issues. So the customer asked us to review it. We review it. We found the CSRF vulnerability. And as I said, we got a lot of media coverage. It became one of the most popular articles this year. And the last point here is, if the bugs in the report were all found by automated tools, or some of them were manually found. It's a good thing if you see that there was actually some manual effort, if you see that somebody actually put the pieces together and maybe they changed 3 or 4 vulnerabilities in order to exploit and to achieve a critical impact on the application, right? That's how it goes. A red flag, obviously, if everything is just automated.
Okay, brilliant. Right, audience participation quickly, and then we do the Yunmai. Question 1, just for the audience. Are you seeing an increase in API-related issues in your pen test reports? You know, are we worrying about something that might not be a problem, or do you think that problem's real? So pop your answers in there. We'll take a quick look at that, and then we do Yunmai. Okay, so answers in. Yeah, so most people are seeing somewhat of a rise. And a couple of people think no. So they're quite interesting. Yeah, I think anecdotally there's data to support that there is a rise as well. Right, thank you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to focus on the Yunmai report that we had. It was API Securities' most viewed article last year. It came top. If you haven't read it, grab the links. There's the original post. There's our post on that as well. And you know, if you really want to see the skills that skilled hackers can bring, this is a great read. And the thing I really liked about it was it tells a story. Right, I can follow from the beginning to the end, and you kind of sit back at the end and you think, wow, you know, that could happen to me as well. So definitely worth reading. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Bogdan, who wrote the article, and I think that the research, and he's going to take you through that vulnerability. And I'll just ask that question: how did you guys come to, come to do this, do this work? How did you? Why Yunmai?
So basically, I was having a look around the house. We wanted to hack some gadgets. And inevitably, I saw the Yunmai Smart Scale that we were using it for some time. And I think, okay, I'm curious. I also mentioned that we're both interested in IoT hacking. So I mentioned this to Bogdan and I asked him, well, I think it would be some cool research. Like we really need to know what are the risks that we're exposing to by using this smart scale. And then basically I passed the idea to Bogdan and he did all the rest. And yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah.
And I did the proofreading, like that's my whole contribution to it. We did a couple of rounds of code review, QA, and until we were happy with the results.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So the UNMI case study. What is UNMI? UNMI is the smart scale that you see here. And this smart scale has an Android and iOS application. What we did a pen test of it, as mentioned earlier, and we found 5 vulnerabilities in it. Bypass limit of 16 family members, user ID enumeration, ineffective authorization checks, information leak, and account takeover to password reset functionality. I'll go in a second to each of them. What was interesting about this pen test was that we've managed to chain these 3 vulnerabilities, these starred ones, and by chaining them in an automated way, you could achieve mass account takeover of all the user accounts. This is an interesting vulnerability that you don't find often. And it's interesting because we've managed to chain vulnerabilities of different severities from low to high. And this way you can see how a low severity vulnerability can contribute. For example, the first one, which contributed as well, has literally no security impact, but we will see in a second how it helps in this chain. So the first one, bypass limit of 16 family members per primary account. This is the iOS application, and in this application, the purpose of the mobile application is to measure, to weigh yourself, and you can create profiles inside the application. As you can see here, we have approximately 16 profiles created where you change your between profiles in order to keep your data separate. For example, if you and your brother use the smart scale, you can keep your data separate. And this is the purpose of creating a profile. And when you reach the limit of 16 profiles, you get this error message if you want to create another profile, that you can only save up to 16 accounts. So I've thought, okay, but how is this limit enforced? So if we take a previous request and we change the name of the profile to, let's say, test 17, and we replay the request, then we will get a success message. So the profile number 17 was created. So this limitation was actually enforced client side and not server side. So this was the first finding, which made me think, we might find some more issues here. And this actually led us to the second vulnerability, because the second vulnerability being user ID enumeration. And this happened when we reached the 16 profile limit, because when you reach this limit, and this happens only on the Android application only, not on the iOS one. So on Android, when we reach the 16 profile limit, a request will be done to the endpoint/device users, as you see here, and it will send the 16 IDs that correspond to your 16 profiles. And it will return data about each of these profiles. And these are the profiles that I've created. So the next question was, okay, how about if I return IDs that do not belong to my family and belong to someone else's household? And let's change this ID. So what I did was I removed the 16 IDs, I left only one, and I started brute forcing it. So in this case, I brute forced only the last 5 digits, as can be seen here. And I've extracted from the response the parameter real name, which was returned. And we've managed to extract all these names. And in this case, for example, for the ID ending in 19125. It corresponds to Dennis, and we've got back his image profile, the sex, his user ID, and a couple more data depending on the user. So what's the impact here? By brute forcing that ID, we've managed to extract user ID, their names, birthday date, profile photos, their sex, and PUID values. And the recommendation here is to return a generic response regardless of whether the account ID is provided or not, if it belongs to the same family or not. Okay, now the next vulnerability. In this application, as I've mentioned earlier, you can create profiles to keep your data separate. And you can also delete profiles in case you've created an extra one or it's not used anymore. So by deleting profiles, we've discovered that you can actually delete profiles from other people's accounts. You literally, this is the endpoint for Android, and this is the endpoint for iOS API. So by modifying the del user ID parameter in both requests with an user ID that we just brute forced earlier, like one slide ago, we will get the message success. So we've managed to delete the profile from someone else's account. And it is identical with adding family members to other people's accounts. Earlier, we've enumerated user IDs, and it also, some user IDs can be PUIDs, which is the main family member of the account. By using such a user ID, we can add profiles to that account. And in this case, we've added the profile test account, and it was a success. And we can see his name, test account. This was the profile created. And here on the iOS application, we can see that the test account was created. So it was a success. Okay. Yes, so we do the same on iOS endpoint. We create the malicious account and we get the message success. It was created. What's the impact here? You can literally add and delete family members to other people's accounts. So you can delete their profiles. And as a recommendation, we recommend to do authorization checks and be enforced throughout the application. Thus, the request should only be done only if the user is part of that family. Otherwise, the request should be rejected. So let's have a look at the previous request where we add profiles to other people's accounts. Here it's also the next vulnerability, information leak, which leads to mass account takeover. So this request is vulnerable to information leak as well, because if we check the response, it leaks a refresh token and also an access token. So now what's next is we can see that the API login is based on this access token. Now that we've created a malicious profile in someone else's account, we can literally log in as that profile and move laterally inside that account because the application gives you this functionality to move between profiles. So by automating these three vulnerabilities, user ID enumeration, ineffective authorization checks by creating a profile, and now information leak, we can automate these three requests and do a mass account takeover for all the UNMI accounts. So what do we get here? We get the refresh token and the access token. So there are two ways now. Either we update our access token with this one, and we start doing authenticated requests in this API, or the long way we use the refresh token and swap it for a newly generated access token. So let's do it this way. We have the refresh token ending in ACB here, and we use the functionality in the app to exchange the refresh token for an access token. We get it here ending in 786. We update our access token with 786 in order to get data about our malicious profile, and we get the PUID value. So that's the ID of the primary profile of that account, which is useful. So it is 692. We use the functionality in the app to switch between profiles. So now we are switching to primary account 692. And we see in the response that it belongs to a real name Bogdan1. This is the user ID and the data about this profile. We see that there are 16 accounts if we search for user ID in this profile. So we know that this profile has 16 user ID, 16 profiles created in it. And reaching this endpoint chart list, we can get all the data sensitive of that profile because it's a smart scale. We have BMI, I don't know, fat percentage, visceral fat, and all sort of data about the weight, of course. And it also has an endpoint to list the whole history of how many times you've weighed on the scale and all the data, of course. And this is how you can leak all the info of that household, let's say so. The impact of this, if we automate this whole process, it will lead to mass account takeover. Thus, you will get access to all the users' data, as seen earlier. And the recommendation on this information leak is fixing the previous vulnerability will fix this one too. So if you cannot create users inside other people's accounts, then this vulnerability, the leaking of this sensitive data, will be only inside the family. So as long as it's inside the family and not outside to other people's accounts, then that should be okay. It's restricted, so it will not get on bad hands, let's say so. And the last vulnerability, account takeover through password reset functionality. This is interesting as well. You have the possibility to enter your email when you log in case you forgot your password, you enter your email and you get back an email code. And by entering this endpoint multiple times, sending the request multiple times, as you can see here, I've received back 6 codes. But all these 6 codes, if you look carefully, are all in the same range, 164,000 to 172,000. So we can literally brute force this range because all are kind of similar. And this is what we did. We brute forced the last 4 digits actually. And we started from 166,000 and we got the hit to 166,309. We see that the responses here were all identical except this one, which had a different length. And this length is the response says success. So this was the successful one. And what's the impact of this? After you hit it correctly, you will get the screen, which I don't have here, and it will ask you to set your new password. And what's the impact here? Someone could take over any UMI's user account. And recommendation here is 1, invalidate the previously generated tokens every time a new token is generated because all of them were valid. And the more tokens you generate, the higher your chance to brute force it. In addition, this token should be valid only for a short amount of time in order to limit the exposure time. And in addition, moreover, we recommend to email the users and notify them regarding this password change. These were the findings on my side. Hopefully, were interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bogdan. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And also some really simple things that those guys just got wrong, and things that could have quite easily been found. So how did the story end? You obviously you've disclosed this to Yinma. What happened then?
Yeah, so we've notified the company. We've notified again 1 or 2, 3 times afterwards, and after the first email, we've got a response back. It was okay. Thank you very much for help. The second and the third time asking for an update, we didn't get any replies back. So it ended abruptly, and
after a couple of months, we decided to do full disclosure because we realized they're not going to fix it. There was poor communication on their side, so we're like, okay, we're going to have to go full disclosure. I'm afraid.
Yep, and they got a free pen test and lots of free advertising.
Yeah,
no press is bad press, right?
Right.
So let's move on. 10 minutes left. Another poll question for the audience here, please. We'll do this quickly. What are you using to do your current testing? So are you doing manual testing? Are you doing any API testing? Are you just using your normal web app pen test guys? Or are you using specialist API with specialist API skills? Are you relying on DAST and SAST? Hopefully that's not the case. Or you're using kind of next breed API conformance scanning to check your contract. So we'll just quickly get to that. We do have a question. I think we'll take that question now, guys. If you can see the chat window, the question is, can you give an example of something that was found, a bug that can be found by a tool and a bug that you had to manually find? So of those things on the Unmind thing, is there anything that you could have found entirely automatically with a tool?
I think most of them were authorization bypasses and enumeration. I feel like most of the work was manual there, to be fair. Isn't that right, Bogdan? Like, let's put it this way, differently. All the stuff that we post on our blog, it's stuff that we do manually.
Yeah.
Where we discover vulnerabilities manually and we chain them together. Everything is done manually.
Yep.
Because if we would post something that was found by a tool, it would be basically a simple injection vulnerability, like
exactly.
scripting, and nobody cares, to be honest, right?
Yep.
And that's not a good way to show skills and expertise in this field.
Yeah, no, I think my comment would be as well, even if you just look at the OWASP API top 10 and you look at how many of those are going to get detected by automated scanners, very little, as you said, OAuth 2 to be able to exploit that or any vulnerabilities, and that takes some pretty specialist skills. Yeah. Cool, so thank you. Do you think auto scanners provide value? Yes, I would. The question often comes up, would you just get rid of your SAST and DAST? No, absolutely not. They'll get that low-hanging fruit.
Correct.
They'll find some of the basic things. They can look for things like unauthenticated endpoints, but don't rely on them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think what we're going to do now is the poll question. Most people are relying on manual testing, and then a good spread across that. That's not altogether surprising. So pop through some more questions. We've got time on this. Adrian, in the interest of time, pick one of those and just give it 2 minutes.
Okay, so I will stop with the first one then. HPP, which means HTTP parameter pollution. So this is one of our favorites, let's say. We did some massive damage with this one. Basically, we managed to bypass some authorization checks, and we were able to steal order info and PII from customers of, let's say, big company here in London that sells some stuff online. So big company, big online store. We use this HPP to bypass all the authorization checks, and they were pretty shocked. Like, to be fair, everybody was shocked because imagine we were accessing. I was logged in my account. I manipulated the request, and I added a second parameter with the name customer ID. So now we had 2 parameters named customer ID. One was the valid one, and one was one that I totally guessed. I brute forced. And what happened is I triggered a code path, which didn't do any authorization checks, and it returned me the PII information of the user ID that I added, right? So I added an extra user ID and I got the information of that user, not my user. So like everybody was shocked because I was able to brute force all the users, all the customers from the database, and I was able to steal information about all users. So yeah, HPP is definitely something that you need to check.
Cool. So final slide, the tools and techniques. I'll go through this quickly. I mean, the tools. So the question is, what's the best, what tool would you use for brute forcing of APIs or stage API calls? There's a load of these things I've used. If you want to do endpoint discovery, use Kite Runner. There's a ton of these things out there. Absolutely the best resource for this, Sander, since you got the question, is grab that link there. That's the GitHub repo of awesome API security. If there's a tool, it'll be in there. That's the go-to resource for that. The point you make about the learning curve on this stuff is brutally hard. It's not something that people are going to pick up easily. What route would you take if somebody's, we've had people, I'm sure developers join this webinar. What would they do first? So let's say somebody who's got, fairly rudimentary skills, what would you suggest they go and do next?
So I would say probably pick up some books. Let's say either an API security book, right? For example, your book on API security, or you mentioned another book that you mentioned towards the end.
Yeah, let's go to that.
Let's go to that a bit.
Yep.
So yeah, we could pick one of these books on hacking APIs. If you want to, let's say, become more familiar with Burp Suite and web application in general, then you could probably also have a look at Web Application Hacker's Handbook. It's a solid book, about 1,000 pages. It's not easy. I mean, I remember I had some challenges first time when I read it, but it's totally worth it. So you could start with those these books, read them, start testing a bit. We're using tools like Burp Suite or Postman. You have to become very familiar with the tools. And basically you have to put in the hours. Like I said, the saying about the 10,000 hours that you need to invest to become an expert in something. We think is definitely true. We definitely put in a lot of hours, and that's the path that you need to go through.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Guys, thanks very much for your time. I'm just going to wrap up the webinar now. So thank you both for participating. Keep writing those blogs. They're extremely useful. Yeah. And also the other one I think that's worth a shout out here is the Portswigger blog, the academy, their web security academy that they have. A lot of those lessons are free, and those guys have absolutely awesome content. So go there. As I said, a couple of books. I've got one coming out soon on defending APIs. Corey Ball's got the he's now famous hacking APIs book, and then of course our newsletter. We've got for you coming up, we've got Isabel Mowney, our field CTO and co-founder, attending the API conference, API World. That's toward the end of October. We'll have a virtual replay of that as well. There's a workshop on OWASP API Security Top 10 and a keynote on the simultaneous value proposition of shifting left and shielding right for end-to-end API security. So that's definitely one to take a look at. I'm sure those recordings will also be online. And then also something that I've co-authored for 42Crunch is the API Security Blueprint for Success. And this is a guide showing you how to get started with API security across those 6 domains. So inventory, governance, design, development, testing, and protection. There's a free download to get yourself started on that. And then the very exciting news that I have to share with the audience, as well as the next webinars that we've got coming up. The legendary Jim Manico. So if people don't know who Jim Manico is, he's like the godfather of AppSec. He's been doing this longer than I think any of us, probably almost certainly. He's going to be joining us for a 2-part webinar series. The first one's going to be on request forgery, SSRF, CSRF, and clickjacking. And the second one on everything that you could possibly want to know about passwords and storage. So registration page for that will be up very shortly. We thank you for your time attending the webinar. Thank you for the questions. So on that note, thank you very much for your attendance and your time. Look forward to seeing you again on a webinar shortly.